Penguin Random House Audio presents Making Friends Can Be Murder by Kathleen West. Read for you by Julia Murney. To my mom, Miriam Williams, who loved these characters from the beginning. Chapter 1. April 1st, 2023. By the time the group met up for the long-anticipated yarn bombing, Sarah had netted 4 new personal training clients via the Sarah Jones Project Instagram account. Not bad for the brainchild of a kid she'd met in her first week after moving to Minnesota. "It's going to be fun," Sarah had told her grandmother on the phone that morning, "and only a normal amount of weird." "Your profile on the gram was nice," Grandma Ellie had said. Of course, Ellie approved of Sarah's unconventional stab at making friends in a new city. Ellie had always believed in the fates. The fates struck quite a lot when your name was as common as Sarah Jones. Emails meant for other women who shared both monikers, multiple rewards customers at the local bookstore, alumni news that had nothing to do with you from your mid-sized university. Mistakes and misidentification abounded. So it had been both surprising and not when 3 days after Sarah had arrived from Vermont and started as the director of personal training and running at Life Sport Fitness, she'd gotten LinkedIn and Instagram DMs from a girl with her same name. But on purpose this time. "It's the fates," Ellie had said, and Sarah could only agree. She'd felt giddy when she'd driven to a meetup of fellow local Sarah Joneses that week. The group had met twice already when she joined, and they'd been so welcoming. Brian, Sarah's ex-fiancé, had warned her it would take months to find community halfway across the country from home. But there she was, about to meet 4 women, well, 3 women, and 1 17-year-old kid, all with the same name. And in the month she'd spent with them since, the Sarah Jones Project had built a social media following. Sarah's client list was growing. There would certainly be more after they bombed the iconic Eastern Cottonwood in Crosby Farm Regional Park. The Pioneer Press had sent a reporter, a woman young enough to be on her first assignment, after the group had sent in a tip. Lucky for all of them, it seemed like a slow news week. A group of same-namers could make the local section. "Remember!" Sarah Patrice Jones, age 69, shouted to the group from her crouch near the tree's trunk. "Stretch the fabric and simple stitch!" Sarah, 30, the group called her, as they all went by their ages so as not to be utterly confused, smoothed a double-stitched section of crocheted yarn in robin's egg blue over a low branch and smiled at 17. "This is the best," she whispered. 17 beamed. "I know. I can't believe this is my punishment." Sarah giggled. The group had begun because 17 had made several public and unfortunate social media blunders. The Catholic nun who directed the upper school at 17's Sacred Heart Academy had mandated a positive social media endeavor as part of a rehabilitative disciplinary proceeding. "Is this right?" 44 asked, pulling another swatch across the trunk. Sarah held her hand over the part of the seam she'd been sewing and peered at 44's work. "Obviously not," 69 piped in. "I measured precisely. We all did, remember? Or were you taking a selfie at that particular critical time?" 30 and 44 exchanged a glance, and 39 spoke up, her words muffled around the thick yarn needle she'd stashed in the corner of her mouth. "We have a social media presence to maintain," she said. 44 and I are the only same-name teachers who regularly wear matching outfits in the 9-state area." "So I've heard," 69 said, repositioning the yarn square. Sarah grinned as she stitched. "It's an odd group," she'd told Grandma Ellie about the Sarahs. "But they're also funny. And they're nice. You'd have to be, right, to even entertain something like this?" 69, in addition to being the crochet master, had retired in the last year from corporate law and also ran a moderately popular Murder, She Wrote recap blog. 39 and 44 taught elementary school in neighboring rooms, and 27, Sarah's closest friend in town, was halfway to a PhD at the University of Minnesota in sociology. "Here for academic interests," she said when she'd shown up to the Sarah Jones Project a week after Sarah. "It seems like destiny, right?" 27 had said. "A whole club of me? A group devoted to having the most common name in the world." 17 had peered at the newcomer's state-issued ID at her first meeting. They couldn't have imposters, the kid insisted. That would dilute the appeal of the project. "It's not even the most common name in the state." 17 handed the license back to 27 with an eyebrow arch. "James Johnson, for instance, James Smith. Both occur more per capita." "But you know what I mean, right?" 27 had smiled at the other women. She was gorgeous. Long brown hair settling perfectly over her shoulders. "When people tell you you're the 7th Sarah Jones they've met or something." 17 had looked suspicious, but then she came out with the group's own origin story. "There was another one on my basketball team," she admitted. "But she's horrible, and she spells it wrong." "No H?" 27 had asked. But 17's doppelganger was even worse. She had said. "Serafina." Good Lord. 27 had chuckled a little, and 30 noticed her sparkling white teeth and the sideways S on her necklace. "So she's SERA? She's not invited, is she?" "Absolutely not." 17 had put down her Starbucks and crossed her arms. "I'm a purist." She rolled her eyes toward the ceiling, thinking the statement through. But in a good way. And now, here they were, performing their culminating task. They hadn't talked about what was next for the group, but they'd all agreed on a spring break after the yarn bombing, during which 17 would rehab her AP Bio grade, and the others would do whatever things normal adults did. The Sarahs swirled around the cottonwood, each with her own tote bag. The reporter from the Pioneer Press stood close, scribbling notes between questions like, "How many Sarah Joneses have you all met in your lifetimes?" And "Why yarn bombing?" "It's whimsical," 17 said in response. "An intergenerational endeavor with positive public appeal." She'd rehearsed that one. "Are we still on for lunch after this?" 27 whispered to Sarah as they smoothed out a cable stitch section. "Totes," Sarah said. They'd go to their usual spot, a cafe across from her Minneapolis apartment, just a building north of the one her mother had lived in when she'd moved to the city 35 years before. Sarah liked to look up at the third-story window she imagined had been her mother's. Liked thinking about Ainsley taking Sarah's father back there after they'd been to a play at one of the city's many tiny theaters. The fates had taken Sarah's mother from them back when Sarah was a 6th grader. But Ainsley had shared countless stories about her time in Minneapolis. Even though Brian had been sure the entire endeavor would be filled with woe, Sarah hadn't regretted moving to Minneapolis even one time, especially once she and 27 became virtually inseparable in their first month of friendship. "Meant to be," Ellie had said. "Your mother would be proud." And as she looked at the tree, its girth covered with fiber, Sarah agreed. Ainsley would have loved this as much as she'd loved making God's eyes with her daughter's Girl Scout troop, as much as she'd loved collecting lines of poetry in spiral-bound notebooks. "It's frickin' gorgeous," 17 said from the base of the ladder 69 had climbed to stitch the final sections. "The colors, they're magical." "Let's not get carried away," 69 said, her hiking boot thunking the bottom rung. Once they were all earthbound, the 6 Sarahs and the reporter walked across the wood-chip path that ran next to the cottonwood. The colors they'd chosen, the swatches of blue, lavender, goldenrod, and Kelly green, checkerboarded over the bark, the tree's knots poking through here and there, the branches telescoped toward the sky. 17 sighed, her hands clasped over her heart as if in prayer. It worked. It's gorgeous.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?